Darnell Carter woke up before the sun even thought about rising. His alarm didn't go off, he didn't need one. His body had learned, over years of early shifts and late worries, to rouse itself just in time. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of his neighborhood. A distant dog barking, the soft creak of his old house settling, and from down the hall, the steady breathing of his two kids still asleep. He took a slow breath, rubbed his eyes, and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. Today wasn't just another Tuesday. Today was the day he'd finally walk into a car dealership with enough saved up to look someone in the eye and say, "I'm ready to buy." Not lease. Not beg. Buy. For months, he'd been patching together his aging sedan with duct tape, prayers, and whatever spare change he could scrape from his weekly grocery budget. The car coughed like an old man every time he turned the key, and last winter it left him stranded twice in freezing rain. Each time he'd called a tow, waited hours, missed half a shift, and lost pay he couldn't afford to lose. He couldn't risk that again, not with school starting soon for his youngest, not with his daughter's braces still being adjusted every 6 weeks. So he'd cut back on everything. No more takeout, no movie nights. He even stopped buying coffee at the gas station, brewing weak but hot coffee at home instead. Every Friday after cashing his paycheck, he'd count out $75 and tuck it into a manila envelope labeled Wheels. By last weekend, that envelope held $1,850, enough for a down payment if he was careful. He spent hours online, scrolling through listings, comparing prices, reading reviews. He wasn't looking for anything flashy, just something safe, reliable, and under 80,000 miles. A car that wouldn't betray him on the way to work or school pickup. He finally settled on a silver 2016 Toyota Corolla, listed at Crestline Auto Group. It had clean history, low mileage, and, most importantly, was within his strict budget if he financed responsibly. Now, standing in front of his closet, Darnell picked out his best shirt, a light blue button-down, slightly faded but clean, with only one tiny stain near the cuff he hoped no one would notice. He paired it with dark slacks and his only pair of dress shoes, scuffed at the toes but polished the night before with an old rag and a dab of olive oil. He checked himself in the mirror, smoothed his hair, and gave a small nod. Not to look rich, just to be taken seriously. The drive to the dealership was tense. His old car groaned up hills and shuddered at stoplights, but it held together, just barely. When he pulled into Crestline's lot, he was struck by how bright everything looked. Rows of gleaming cars under the morning sun, flags snapping in the breeze, a glass front showroom that sparkled like a jewelry store. He parked near the entrance, turned off the engine, and sat for a full minute, hands still on the wheel, gathering his thoughts. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and new carpet. A pop song played softly overhead. A receptionist smiled and asked if he'd been helped. Before he could answer, a man in a crisp navy blazer and perfectly knotted tie approached with a wide, practiced grin. "Hey there, I'm Trent. How can I get you into something great today?" Darnell returned the smile, though it felt stiff. "Hi, I'm interested in that silver Corolla. The one online, 2016, about 68,000 miles. Trent's eyes flickered just for a split second, but Darnell saw it. That tiny pause, that quick once-over of his shoes, his shirt, the way he held himself like he wasn't quite sure he belonged. Trent's smile didn't fade, but it changed. It became thinner. "Oh, that one," Trent said, leading him toward the lot without waiting for a reply. "Yeah, it's still here. But honestly, you might want to look at something newer. That Corolla's got a few quirks, and with your situation, maybe we find you something with a longer warranty." Darnell blinked. "My situation?" Trent chuckled like it was a joke between friends. "You know, budget-wise, no offense, man. I just don't want you stuck with a lemon and payments you can't handle." They reached the car. Darnell ran a hand along the hood. It was clean, well kept. He opened the door, checked the interior. No stains, no odd smells. "I've done my research," he said calmly. "This model's known for reliability, and I've got a down payment ready." Trent leaned against a nearby SUV, arms crossed. "Down payment's great, sure. But financing's the real deal. You got good credit? Stable job? Because if you're bouncing between gigs or—" "I've worked at the same warehouse for 7 years," Darnell interrupted, voice steady but firm. "Full-time. Benefits. I just need something that starts every morning and gets me where I need to go." Trent raised his eyebrows, then shrugged. All right. Let's talk numbers. He pulled out a tablet, tapped a few times, and showed Darnell a screen. With your down payment, we're looking at $398 a month. Darnell frowned. That's way over what I saw online. The ad said under $300. That's just a teaser rate, Trent said, waving a hand. For qualified buyers. You know how it is. Darnell felt his stomach tighten. Can we go over the math? Maybe adjust the term. Before he could finish, Trent's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at Darnell with a look that said, I've got better things to do. Look, buddy, I can run the numbers all day. But if you're not serious about moving forward, I've got customers waiting who actually want to drive home in something nice. The words landed like a slap. Darnell's face warmed. He wasn't used to being talked down to, especially not when he'd worked so hard to be prepared. He took a breath. I am serious. I just want to understand what I'm signing up for. Trent sighed, then turned slightly, raising his voice just enough for the nearby sales desk to hear. Man, some people walk in here like we're running a charity. They think a few $100 and a sob story gets them a brand new ride. It doesn't work like that. A few heads turned. Darnell froze. His chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but what would that prove? That he was poor and proud? That he cared about his kids? None of that mattered here, not to this man. He looked at the Corolla again. It wasn't just a car. It was peace of mind. It was not having to choose between a mechanic bill and school supplies, but standing there under the fluorescent lights of a place that suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. He realized something. No car was worth this kind of shame. Without another word, Darnell straightened his shoulders, turned, and walked back toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked out into the sunlight, heart-pounding, jaw-clenched, eye-stinging, not from tears, but from the sheer unfairness of it all. He got into his old car, started the engine, it sputtered twice before catching, and drove away. But as he merged onto the main road, something inside him shifted. Not defeat, not anger, a quiet resolve. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd shown up prepared, respectful, honest. If they couldn't see his worth, that was their loss, not his, and maybe, just maybe, there was another dealership out there, one where people were treated like people, not like problems to be sized up and dismissed. He'd find it. For his kids, for himself, because dignity wasn't something you bought. It was something you carried, and no slick salesman in a blazer could take that away. The showroom buzzed with the kind of energy that only money and polished surfaces can create. Bright lights reflected off hoods and windshields. Salespeople laughed too loudly near the coffee machine, and a couple in their 30s test drove a black SUV with tinted windows, smiling like they'd already signed the papers. But near the finance desk, the air felt different, tight, charged, like before a storm. Darnell stood there, still holding the printout he'd made the night before. He'd circled the Corolla's VIN number, written down his questions in neat handwriting. Warranty? Maintenance history? Exact mileage? Monthly payment at 60 months? He wasn't trying to trick anyone. He just wanted to be sure. Every dollar mattered. Every decision had weight. Trent, the salesman, leaned against the counter with one elbow, scrolling through his phone like he was doing Darnell a favor just by standing nearby. When Darnell asked again about the $398 monthly payment, because online it said $289, Trent let out a short laugh. The kind that wasn't really laughter at all. Man, you gotta read the fine print, he said, not even looking up. That's for people with like 750 credit. You know what I'm saying? Darnell didn't flinch. My credit's 680, I checked last week, and I've never missed a payment in my life. Trent finally looked at him, eyebrows raised like he was surprised Darnell knew what a credit score was. Okay. But even then, with your situation, we gotta protect ourselves. Cars like this, they go fast. Serious buyers don't haggle over $30. I'm not haggling, Darnell said, voice low but clear. I just want to understand why the number changed. That's when Trent turned to his coworker, a guy in a matching blazer named Derek, who was pretending to file paperwork but was clearly listening. Yo, Derek, Trent called out loud enough for half the showroom to hear. This guy thinks we're running a nonprofit. Wants a brand new Corolla for bus fare. Derek snorted. Bro, you gonna throw in free gas and a lunchbox too? A few people chuckled. A woman waiting near the service desk glanced away, uncomfortable. Darnell felt his face burn, but he kept his eyes on Trent. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse. Just said, "I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for honesty." But Trent was done playing nice. He tossed the tablet onto the counter like it weighed nothing. "Look," he said, stepping closer, "you want the car? Great. Sign here, put down your money, and drive off. But if you're going to stand here asking questions like you're auditing us, maybe you should go to a junkyard. They'll sell you a bucket of bolts for what you're offering." The words hung in the air. Darnell didn't move. He just stared at the man who minutes ago had called him buddy, and now looked at him like he was gum stuck under a shoe. Then Trent did something worse. He reached for the coffee cup on the desk, half full, lukewarm, and accidentally knocked it over near Darnell's papers. Dark liquid spread across the counter, dripping onto the floor, narrowly missing Darnell's shoes but soaking the edge of his printout. "Oh, shoot," Trent said, not sounding sorry at all. "Clumsy me. Guess you'll have to print that again. If you've got a printer at home." It was the last straw, not because of the coffee, not even because of the insult, but because in that moment Darnell realized this wasn't about cars anymore. It was about respect, and Trent had made it clear he didn't think Darnell deserved any. He didn't yell, didn't throw anything. He simply took a slow breath, picked up his damp papers, and folded them carefully into his back pocket. Then he looked Trent in the eye, not with anger but with something quieter, heavier. Disappointment. "You know," Darnell said, voice calm, "I've worked jobs where my hands bled by lunchtime. I've stayed late without overtime because someone needed help. I've driven this old car through hailstorms just to clock in on time. And today, I walked in here ready to spend hard-earned money, not because I wanted to, but because my kids deserve better than a car that might quit on them. But you see a man in worn shoes and think he's nothing." He paused. Trent opened his mouth to respond, but Darnell held up a hand. "I'm not your punchline, and I'm not your problem. So keep your car. I'll find one somewhere else, somewhere they treat people like human beings." And with that, he turned and walked out. No drama, no slamming doors. Just the soft whoosh of the automatic glass door opening, then closing behind him. Outside, the sun was high now, warm on his skin. He stood for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the effort of holding himself together. He got into his car, started it. It coughed once, then rumbled to life, and pulled out of the lot slowly, checking his mirrors like always. But as he drove away, something unexpected happened. A man standing near the edge of the lot, wearing a plain gray jacket and holding a paper cup, watched him go. He didn't look like a salesman. No flashy badge, no practiced smile, just an older man with tired eyes and a quiet presence. He'd been sitting on a bench near the service entrance, sipping coffee, observing everything. When Darnell left, the man's gaze followed him all the way to the street. Then he stood up, walked back inside, and headed straight for the manager's office. Back in the showroom, Trent was already laughing with Derek again, replaying the junkyard line like it was comedy gold. "Dude, did you see his face?" he said, mimicking Darnell's serious expression. Like he actually thought we'd give him a deal. Derek high-fived him. "Man, you shut that down fast," but not everyone was laughing. The receptionist, a woman who'd been there 10 years and seen every kind of customer walk through those doors, looked down at her keyboard and shook her head. She'd watched Darnell earlier, how he'd held the door for an elderly woman, how he'd thanked the parking attendant, how he'd taken notes like he was studying for an exam. That wasn't a freeloader. That was a man trying his best. Meanwhile, Darnell drove home with the windows down, letting the wind clear his head. He thought about calling the dealership to complain, but what good would that do? They'd probably say Trent was just being direct or passionate about sales. No, this wasn't a place that valued people like him. And that was okay. He'd keep looking. There had to be other lots, other salespeople who understood that buying a car wasn't just a transaction, it was a moment of trust. What he didn't know was that someone inside that very dealership had seen everything. Someone who didn't just own the place but built it from nothing. Someone who remembered what it felt like to be judged by your shoes, your accent, your bank account. And that person wasn't going to let this slide. But for now, Darnell just needed to get home. His daughter had soccer practice at 4, and he promised he'd be there. Rain or shine, old car or not. Because showing up for the people you love, that was the real measure of a man. not the badge on your blazer or the keys in your pocket. And as he turned onto his street, the engine humming its familiar, shaky tune, he felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Not because he'd won an argument, but because he'd walked away with his dignity intact, and no one, not Trent, not the whole dealership, could take that from him. The front porch light flickered a little as they stood just outside the screen door, the kind of soft yellow glow that made everything feel quieter, more honest. Darnell didn't say much at first. He just watched the woman in front of him. No fancy suit, no rehearsed speech, just a calm presence and eyes that didn't look away when things got uncomfortable. Elena didn't rush. She didn't pull out a folder or flash a business card. She just said, "I'm sorry." Not "we're sorry," not "mistakes were made," just "I'm sorry." And that made all the difference. Darnell crossed his arms, not in anger, but like he was holding himself together. "You saw what happened?" "I did," she said. Every word, every look, every drop of that coffee. He let out a slow breath. "I didn't come in there looking for a handout. I just wanted to be treated like I mattered." "You do matter," she said simply. "And you should have been treated like it." There was a pause. From inside the house, a child laughed. Light, carefree. The kind of sound that reminded you why any of this was worth fighting for. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is the real deal on that Corolla. No hidden fees. No teaser rates. $289 a month, 60 months with your down payment. Full warranty. Clean title. And if you'd like, we can go over every line together. Right here, right now." Darnell took the paper. His fingers brushed the edge like he was checking if it was real. He read it slowly, line by line. The numbers matched what he'd researched. The terms were clear. "No fine print traps. Why?" he finally asked, looking up. "Why come all the way here just for me?" "Because it's not just about you," she said. "It's about who we are as a company. If we let someone walk away feeling less than human, we've already lost, no matter how many cars we sell." He nodded slowly. Then, for the first time that day, he almost smiled. "My daughter's got a school play Friday. I've been worried my car wouldn't make it. She's the lead in the spring musical." "Then let's make sure you're there," Elena said, "in a car that starts every time." They didn't sign anything that night. No pressure, no rush. Elena just left the paperwork with him and said, "Take your time. Sleep on it. If you decide to move forward, call me directly. No middleman. No games." The next morning, Darnell called. By noon, he was back at Crestline, but this time things were different. Elena met him at the door herself. The finance manager, a woman named Lisa who'd been with the company for 12 years, walked him through every detail with patience and zero judgment. When Darnell asked about maintenance costs, she pulled up a full-service history on the tablet. When he worried about insurance, she connected him with a local agent who gave him a quote on the spot. Trent wasn't on the lot. He'd been placed on immediate leave pending retraining. The staff had been briefed. This wasn't punishment, it was a reset. Anyone who couldn't treat every customer with basic decency didn't belong here. As Darnell signed the final papers, he felt something unexpected. Relief, yes, but also hope. Not just for the car, but for the idea that maybe the world wasn't as cold as it sometimes seemed. Later that week, Elena called a full team meeting, not in the training room, but in the showroom right where it happened. She didn't rehash the incident. Instead, she introduced a new policy, the Customer Dignity Pledge. Every employee would now go through a 2-day workshop focused not just on sales tactics, but on listening, empathy, and recognizing bias, conscious or not. Mystery shoppers would visit monthly, but not to catch people slipping up. To reward those who went the extra mile with kindness. And then she did something no one expected. She invited Darnell to join Crestline's new Customer Advisory Panel, a small group of real buyers who would meet quarterly to give honest feedback on the experience. Not as a token gesture, but as a true voice in shaping how the dealership operated. At first, Darnell hesitated. "I'm not a business guy," he said when she called to ask. "I just drive a forklift." "And that's exactly why we need you," Elena replied. "You see things we don't. You live the reality we only talk about in meetings." So he said yes. The first panel meeting was held in a quiet conference room with coffee, notepads, and no sales targets in sight. Darnell sat beside retirees, young parents, a nurse who worked night shifts, and a college student saving for her first car. They shared stories, good and bad, about car buying. Some had been pressured into extended warranties they didn't need. Others were ignored because they didn't look like buyers. Darnell spoke last. "I didn't need a fancy car," he said, voice steady. "I just needed to know someone saw me, not my wallet, not my shoes, but me. And that day I didn't feel seen. I felt invisible." The room was silent. Then one of the sales managers, a man who'd been with Crestline for 15 years, cleared his throat. "I've been doing this job so long I forgot what it feels like to walk in here for the first time," he admitted. "Thanks for reminding me. Change didn't happen overnight. But it started." Meanwhile, Trent completed the retraining program. Reluctantly at first, then with growing awareness. He watched recordings of real customer interactions, role-played difficult conversations, and even spent a day shadowing a nonprofit that helped low-income families access reliable transportation. By the end, he asked to speak with Darnell, not to apologize publicly, but privately, humbly. Darnell agreed. They met in the service waiting area, over paper cups of coffee. Trent didn't make excuses. "I was wrong," he said. "I judged you before I even heard your story, and that's on me." Darnell looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Everyone deserves a second chance. Just don't waste it on someone else." Trent nodded, and from that day on, his approach changed. Slowly, surely, not because he had to, but because he finally understood why it mattered. Back at home, Darnell's kids loved the new car. His daughter practiced her lines in the back seat on the way to rehearsal. His youngest fell asleep on the drive home from soccer, head against the window, safe and sound. And Darnell? He started each morning with a quiet confidence he hadn't felt in years. The engine purred. The heat worked. The brakes didn't squeal, but more than that, he walked taller. Because he'd stood up for himself without losing his kindness. And in doing so, he'd helped change more than just his own situation. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He just wanted a fair shot. And sometimes that's enough to start something bigger than you ever imagined. The man in the gray jacket didn't say a word as he walked back into the dealership. He moved quietly, like someone used to watching more than talking. His coffee cup was empty now, crumpled slightly in his hand. He didn't head for the showroom floor with its bright lights and booming voices. Instead, he turned down the hallway toward the back offices, past the break room where salespeople tossed empty energy drink cans into an overflowing bin, past the finance manager's door where someone was loudly closing a deal over the phone. His name was Elena Rojas, though no one on the lot knew that today. To them, she was just another visitor, maybe a mystery shopper, maybe a competitor doing recon. She wore no jewelry, no logoed lanyard, no sign that she'd founded this entire auto group 23 years ago with a $5,000 loan and a beat-up pickup truck. Back then, she'd been turned away from 3 dealerships herself. Not because she couldn't pay, but because she was a young woman with calloused hands and no husband beside her. She never forgot how that felt. And she'd built Crestline on one simple rule: treat every customer like they might be your next best friend. But lately, she'd been hearing whispers. Complaints buried in online reviews, a dip in repeat customers, a growing gap between the premium clients and everyone else. So every quarter she came in plain clothes, no warning, just to see what her people were really like when they thought no one important was watching. Today, she saw everything. She'd been sitting on that bench near the service bay for nearly an hour, sipping cheap coffee from the gas station across the street when Darnell pulled in. She noticed him right away, not because he stood out, but because he didn't try to. He parked carefully, checked his reflection in the rear view, smoothed his shirt like he was preparing for something important. And he was. Buying a car wasn't just shopping for him, it was survival. Elena watched as Trent greeted him with that practiced grin, the one that never reached his eyes. She saw the shift in Trent's posture the moment he decided Darnell wasn't his kind of buyer. She heard every word of the exchange, even the ones meant to be private. And when Trent knocked over that coffee, deliberately, she was sure. Her stomach tightened like it had 20 years ago, standing in a showroom in a too-big blazer. Being told, "We don't finance dreams here." Sweetheart, she didn't step in, not then. Because leadership wasn't about rescuing one person in the moment. It was about fixing the system that let it happen in the first place. Now, in her office, a modest room with framed photos of her first lot, her team at charity events, her late father who'd taught her to change oil before she could drive. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She typed Darnell's name into the customer inquiry log, found his form, read his notes, looking for reliable transportation for work and school. Budget, $275, $300 month. Down payment ready. No trade-in, simple, honest human. She picked up the phone and dialed the general manager's extension. Carl, she said, voice calm but firm. Cancel my afternoon meetings. I need you and HR in my office in 10 minutes. And pulled Trent's file. Then she printed Darnell's contact info, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her jacket pocket. An hour later, the staff huddle was called. No one knew why. Salespeople grumbled as they filed into the training room, checking watches, whispering about commissions. Trent leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone, smirking like always. Elena walked in without fanfare. She didn't wear her usual blazer, just a simple black sweater and slacks. But the room went quiet the second she stepped through the door. Even Trent looked up. She didn't start with anger. She started with a story. This morning, she began, a man walked onto our lot. He wasn't flashy, didn't drive a luxury car, wore shoes that had seen better days. But he came prepared. He had questions. He had a budget. He had dignity. She paused. Let the words sink in. He asked about a Corolla, the one we advertise as affordable and reliable. He wanted to know the real payment, the real terms. Not because he was trying to cheat us, but because every dollar he spends affects his kids' meals, their school supplies, their safety. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. And instead of helping him, someone here mocked him, made him feel small, treated him like he was wasting our time just by existing in this space. Trent shifted, suddenly very interested in his shoelaces. Elena didn't name him, not yet. I've built this company on one belief, that a car isn't just metal and rubber. It's freedom. It's a parent getting to work on time. It's a teenager driving to college interviews. It's dignity on four wheels. And when we forget that, we stop being a business and start being a barrier. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 2 words, respect, responsibility. These aren't slogans, she said. They're requirements. Then she turned to Trent. You know who I'm talking about. And you know what you did? Trent opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. Don't explain. Don't excuse. Just listen. You will be suspended effective immediately. You'll undergo mandatory retraining in customer empathy and ethical sales practices. If you complete it and demonstrate real change, you can return. If not, your last day is today. The room was dead silent. Then she added, softer but no less firm, and to the man who walked out of here humiliated this morning, we're going to make it right. Not with a discount, not with a freebie, but with honesty, respect, and the car he came for, at the price he deserved. After the meeting, Elena sat alone for a long time. She thought about calling Darnell right then, but decided against it. A phone call from a CEO might feel like pity. She wanted him to feel seen, not as a victim, but as a person worth meeting face to face. So that evening, after work, she drove to the address on his form. It was a quiet neighborhood, trees lining the street, kids' bikes leaning against porches. She parked down the block, walked up the sidewalk, and knocked on the door. When Darnell opened it, he looked surprised but not scared. Just tired. Mr. Carter, she said, my name is Elena Rojas. I own Crestline Auto Group. I was at the dealership this morning. I saw what happened. He didn't invite her in right away, just studied her face, searching for angles, for sales tricks. I'm not here to sell you anything, she said gently. I'm here to apologize, and to ask if you'd be willing to give us another chance, not because we deserve it, but because you deserve better than what you got. Darnell was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Come in, he said. My kids are doing homework, but I've got 5 minutes. That was all she needed, because sometimes the most powerful changes don't start in boardrooms or press releases. They start on a front porch between 2 people who choose to see each other, not as customer and CEO, but as human beings. And from that moment, everything began to shift. 3 months after that tense morning at the dealership, the lot at Crestline Auto Group felt different. Not in the way things look when you repaint the walls or add new banners, but in the way people moved through it. There was less shouting, less forced laughter, more real conversation. Customers weren't rushed. Questions weren't brushed off. And if someone walked in wearing worn shoes or carrying a folded-up printout, they were greeted the same as anyone else, with a handshake, a smile, and the simple assumption that they belonged. Darnell's silver Corolla sat parked near the service bay, not because it needed repairs, it hadn't needed a single one, but because he'd come in for his quarterly checkup, part of the free maintenance package that came with his purchase. He leaned against the fender, sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching as a young couple nervously asked about their first car. The salesperson, a woman Darnell recognized from the advisory panel meetings, listened patiently, nodding, writing notes. No pressure, no judgment, just help. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Inside the showroom, Elena stood near the front window, arms crossed, not with authority but with quiet satisfaction. She'd just finished reviewing the latest customer feedback reports. Complaints were down 68%, repeat buyers were up, and the advisory panel's suggestions like clearer pricing displays and a no-pressure, waiting area with books and toys for kids had been rolled out across all 3 Crestline locations, but the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in the tone. She remembered the day Darnell first walked in, how he'd held himself like he was bracing for rejection. Now he walked in like he owned the place, not with arrogance but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he'd earned his seat at the table. Later that afternoon, Darnell stopped by her office. He wasn't there for service or paperwork. He was there because his daughter's school play was that night, and he wanted to thank her not for the car, but for listening. "I used to think places like this weren't for people like me," he said, standing in the doorway. "Now I know it's not about the place. It's about the people running it." Elena smiled. "And the people holding them accountable," he nodded. "Yeah, that too." They didn't talk long, but before he left, she handed him 2 tickets. "Front row," she said. "From me and the team. We heard she's amazing." He took them, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." That night, Darnell parked his Corolla in the school lot, smooth, quiet, reliable, and walked inside with his youngest asleep on his shoulder and his oldest bouncing ahead in her costume. He found their seats, settled in, and watched as the curtain rose. His daughter stepped into the spotlight, voice clear and strong, and for the first time in a long time, Darnell let himself just be, not a provider, not a problem, not a budget, but a dad, proud and present. Back at Crestline, Trent was working his shift. He wasn't the top seller anymore, and he didn't care. He'd learned that closing a deal didn't mean pushing someone into a car they couldn't afford. It meant helping them find the right fit, even if that meant sending them home to think or pointing them to a cheaper model. Last week, he'd even helped an elderly man trade in his old pickup for a compact SUV with easier entry and better gas mileage. The man had shaken his hand and said, "You treated me like my son would." Trent hadn't known what to say, so he just said, "Thank you." He still had a long way to go, but he was trying. And in this new version of Crestline, trying was enough, as long as you kept going. Meanwhile, the customer advisory panel met again. This time they discussed financing transparency. Darnell suggested a simple 1-page summary for every quote. No jargon, just clear numbers. The finance team loved it. They tested it the next week. Customers stayed longer, asked better questions, and closed deals faster, not because they were pressured, but because they finally understood what they were signing. It turned out that honesty wasn't just the right thing to do. It was good business. As the months passed, other dealerships started taking notice. A few even reached out to Crestline, asking how they'd improved their review so quickly. Elena didn't guard the secret. She shared it freely. Start by seeing people, not profits. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still tough days, tight budgets, and customers who walked away. But the culture had shifted. Employees spoke up when they saw something off. Managers checked in, not just on sales, but on how people were being treated. And every new hire now spent their first day shadowing a customer, not a salesperson, to understand what it really felt like to walk through those doors. One rainy afternoon, Darnell brought his car in for an oil change. As he waited, he flipped through a magazine, then looked up and saw a man sitting across from him, nervous, glancing at his phone, clutching a folder of papers. Darnell recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not long ago. He walked over. First time buying a car? He asked gently. The man nodded. Yeah, kinda overwhelmed. Darnell sat down. Mind if I wait with you? I've been there. And just like that, the circle kept turning, not with grand speeches or dramatic moments, but with small acts of kindness passed from one person to the next, because in the end, this story wasn't really about a car or a salesman, or even a CEO. It was about what happens when someone chooses dignity over convenience, when a leader chooses accountability over image, and when a community chooses to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Darnell drove home that night through steady rain, windshield wipers keeping time like a heartbeat. His car didn't sputter. His kids were safe in the back, and for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel uncertain. It felt possible, and sometimes that's all you need to keep going.